Chapter 21, Section 2. We're going to begin this one by talking about some different eras of American foreign policy, the three I's of American foreign policy. The first one we're going to mention is isolationism. We're going to practice isolationism between 1914 and about 1917. This is the idea that America had enough of her own problems and we'll leave the European problems to Europe. The second I of American foreign policy was internationalism. This we're actually going to follow after World War I up until we get involved in World War II. This is where we help dictate world diplomacy. This is where we help, we voice our opinion on what we think should be done. We don't stay completely out, but we don't necessarily get involved. We voice our opinion. We control who we trade with. So you might see trade embargoes, economic sanctions, stuff like that. And then you have for the third I, interventionism. Interventionism is what we practiced during World War I, during World War II. It's a big part of the Cold War, after World War II. This is the idea that we are superior and we need to help our inferior neighbors. We use this when our national security is threatened and talking won't help the issue. We will actually intervene. So let's get back to the beginnings here of World War I. Our president was Woodrow Wilson. Early on, Woodrow Wilson announces the U.S. neutrality. And the American public was very supportive of this. He received a lot of strong support for our neutral stance. Wilson even tried to negotiate peace. Not that either side was really interested in it, but we did offer. Now, although the official policy of the United States is neutral, many of the individual citizens were not neutral. I mean, you're talking 28 million immigrants were in the U.S. at this time. That's about a third of our population. Some of them were from Central Power nations. So when they lean one way or the other, they lean towards where they had come from, which is possibly a Central Power nation. Irish Americans, they favored the Central Powers because Irish Americans wanted to see Ireland freed from Britain. But most Americans favor the Allies, a big part because of Britain. With Britain, we share a common language, we share a common culture. Britain was also producing a lot of propaganda. Propaganda is news and information designed to persuade you to adopt certain views. British propaganda would paint the Germans as these brutal killers. And so when Americans saw these images of the Germans painted like that, just naturally, they thought, wow, the Germans are bad people. U.S. businesses and banks loan somewhere around maybe $1.5 billion to the Allies. So even though the official policy of the U.S. was neutrality, an individual person could choose what they wanted. Now, the U.S. is going to be touched by this war, despite the fact that we're neutral. For example, Britain is going to mine the North Sea. Well, mines don't care whose ship it was. So if our ships are out there, mines are a threat to our ship. Britain was also blockading Germany. They were searching ships to make sure no war materials were reaching Germany. That included our ships. That included our mail, even, they'd search through. And Wilson protests this violation of our neutrality. Germany is going to respond to this blockade by establishing a war zone around Britain. You can see it on that map there, kind of shaded area around Britain there. And Germany warns that U-boats might sink any ship in that war zone. including neutral ones. Now, this obviously concerns us. This concerns Wilson. Wilson is going to warn Germany that they will be held accountable for any lost U.S. lives or property. March 28, 1915. A German U-boat is going to sink a British passenger ship in the Irish Sea. 100 people die aboard that British passenger ship. One of the dead was American. This put Wilson in one heck of a situation. Germany will be held accountable for any lost U.S. lives. We just lost a life. And so the U.S. has to decide what to do about this. May 7th, 1915. A British passenger ship, the Lusitania, is sunk by a U-boat. Approximately 1,200 people are dead. 128 of them are American. Now, the Germans claimed that the ship was carrying armaments or weapons for Britain. Britain denies everything about it. Who do we believe? We believe Britain. Although we now know that Britain probably was smuggling armaments aboard the Lusitania. So it was true what Germany was saying. But Americans were outraged at this time at Germany. But Germany comes out and they say, hey, we warned people. We warned passengers in newspaper ads. There's an ad there out of a newspaper in Britain, basically warning people, if you travel on these ships here, you're taking your lives into your own hands. It's traveling into war areas. So Germany's like, we warned the people that going into these areas in these ships was going to be dangerous. Wilson is going to demand that Germany stop unrestricted submarine warfare. When Wilson makes this demand, our Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, resigns. Bryan complained, we can't be neutral and be issuing ultimatums like this. That's not neutral. More U.S. citizens die on passenger ships. In August 1915, in March 1916, Wilson threatens to cut off diplomatic ties with Germany. We won't talk to him anymore, which basically is a step before war. Germany has no interest in going to war with us. They've got their hands full in Europe already. So Germany is going to issue the Sussex Pledge, which is going to be the renewal of a promise to not sink ocean liners without warning. Basically, the U-boat will surface, it'll warn the ship, civilians can get to the lifeboats, and then they'll sink the ship. Obviously, this is not going to be in effect for military ships. You can't surface and tell a battleship you're going to sink it, because when you do that, they'll sink you. But for these passenger ships, for these ocean liners, they'll warn them now. Now, different people viewed Wilson's view, his approach, differently. Many Americans supported it. I mean, he was keeping us out of this war. But some viewed the reaction of Wilson as not strong enough. For example, Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt basically said, Wilson's a coward. He's weak. Americans are dying, and what are we doing about it? The new Secretary of State, Robert Lansing, is going to encourage our industries to trade war materials to the Allies. By 1916, we're trading $500 million worth of war materials with the Allies. To give you an idea of that increase, that's 80 times the amount of war materials we were trading with the Allies than we were in 1914. Now, as much as Wilson wants to keep us out of this war, as much as America desires to keep us out of this war, it's becoming harder and harder to keep us out of this war. and we better be ready. So in 1916, we'd begun a military preparedness program. We had to get prepared just in case. And I tell you what, our banks, our war industries, they love this. They were already invested into the Allies. June 1916, Congress passes the National Defense Act, which is going to increase the regular army from 90,000 to 175,000, the goal being eventually almost 250,000. National Guard is going to be built up to 450,000. And later on, the Navy gets their own bill, which is going to give them $313 million to build up the Navy